Hey moms, it's Laura Ollinger. Welcome to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast. Because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world.
Hello and welcome to today's show of the Positively Healthy Mom podcast. Today I have Amy Thompson Martin, who is a pediatric occupational therapist and feeding specialist and founder of Little Table of Grace Coaching. So Amy, can you tell us a little bit about what got you into this line of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been practicing a little over 17 years. And what actually got me into wanting to become a pediatric occupational therapist is I nannied for a little boy in undergrad. And I kind of took him to some of his therapies, and I learned about occupational therapy then. I fell in love with that profession, and that just kind of put me on my path to go get my master's in occupational therapy. And then after that, once I was practicing, I became a feeding specialist. And so that's really where my passion lies is helping families, kids and parents and families with their child's pediatric feeding challenges.
Awesome. Well, I think it's so awesome that we're having this conversation because I know there are a lot of parents of teenagers who struggle with picky eating and eating challenges. So tell us a little bit about what the root causes of picky eating for teenagers might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people think that picky eating only has to do with toddlers. And it actually 1 in 4 kiddos don't grow out of those picky eating stages. So there's a lot of older kids that are really struggling with picky eating and extreme picky eating. And so there absolutely are. When kids are not outgrowing these picky eating tendencies, there's root causes that are creating this challenge. And so these root causes can be some medical components like reflux, food intolerances, food allergies, GI upset, things like that, or GI discomfort. Another root cause can be motor challenges. So sometimes kids and even teenagers struggle with the physical act of chewing and swallowing. And so that might create some feeding challenges. Another is sensory sensitivities. And this is probably one of the most common root causes to picky eating. And this is where kids are just incredibly sensitive to the sensory input of food, the way it looks, the way it feels, the way it smells, the way it tastes. And when kids are sensitive to that sensory input, can literally make them feel repulsed. And then so as a coping mechanism, they kind of start to refuse or become incredibly rigid about only eating foods that are familiar to them. Another root cause can be temperament. So a lot of times picky eaters, they just have more of a temperament where they prefer to be in control. They're pretty rigid a lot of times. New unfamiliar things are really hard. A lot of times I see a lot of kids who really struggle with worry and anxiety around different things or new things in food. New foods can create an incredible amount of worry and anxiety in the kiddos that I work with. And then another root cause is just the routine and structure that we as parents might establish at meal times with our kids. And, you know, it's not our fault because we just want our kids to eat something, right? But a lot of times when we as parents have kids with picky eaters, we might fall into that trap of offering them the same food all the time or only offering them what they want at that particular meal. Typically, we as parents kind of become short order cooks. And so it just contributes to that downward spiral of picky eating.
Yeah. So and I can imagine too, it becomes incredibly this kind of like stressful experience and us even like forcing them or being desperate and then picking up on our energy and our stress. And then it's probably this like negative downward spiral where they're like, you know, it just becomes really not a happy environment, like maybe for eating and dinner time. And so that's kind of why I was actually so fascinated to bring you on the show and to talk to you, because teenagers themselves are known for their resistance. They're known for wanting to go in the opposite direction of what their mom or dad wants them to do. And that's totally normal. It's developmentally appropriate for them to create their own identity, figure out who they are, what they want in their life. And part of that might come down to my mom wants me to eat this, so therefore I don't, right? They just kind of want to go with it. And so I'm so curious, like, how can you, I mean, there's so many root causes. So I don't know if you could generalize too well, but how can you help families who are dealing with these challenges?
Yes, so there's absolutely things that we can do to help. It does get a little tricky in those teenage years because we're also trying to teach them a little bit of independence, right? So, one thing that can really help parents is establishing consistent routine and structure around meal times.
Mm,
And there's a lot of different routine and structure around meal times that we can establish, but one of them is, trying to have a consistent feeding schedule, or and this is hard with teens, but every once in a while trying to come together as a family and eating a meal so that you're role modeling eating new foods.
mm,
um Sometimes meal planning can help so that the child, the teenager, knows what to expect and what meals are coming that week, so that that makes them feel like they have a little bit of control.
mm,
But then also the parent kind of taking a little bit, knowing what they are responsible for, and knowing what the child's responsible for. So the parent can be responsible for what they serve. So instead of the teenager kind of running the kitchen and kind of demanding, actually, what they want and what they don't want,
mhm,
trying to establish that routine and structure where the parent chooses what's served for dinner. And then and this is the hard part, if the teenager totally refuses, trying to stick to what you've decided to serve for dinner. And there's other things that go along with that to help manage if the teenager were to get super irritated or upset with that. But I
mhm.
think a big thing is just, I teach the parent how to establish routine and structure around meal times, and how to do that when
Mm,
you have a teenager, which it can
yeah.
be challenging.
Yeah, yes. Especially with multiple kids. And if you do have multiple picky eaters, I can only imagine that that's even a bigger recipe for disaster. No pun intended.
Oh, absolutely. And feeding challenges are incredibly stressful. I mean, not only for the child, not only for the teenager, because
Mhm,
typically when they're really struggling with eating different foods, they're really worried or nervous about trying new things. So it's stressful on the teenager, but
mhm,
it's incredibly stressful for the parent because, they're exhausted. They don't understand their teenagers, why they're being so reluctant to eat. A lot of times parents are getting incredibly worried about their child's nutrition. We all know how important nutrition is, especially in those teenage years, to help with everything: development, school, energy, athletics. A lot of times our kids, teenage years, are playing athletics. So there's a lot of worry and stress that goes into picky eating.
yes, I'm so glad you brought up the athletics angle because that's impacting me personally. So, my son, who's a freshman, is a hardcore football player. He's all
Yes.
into weightlifting and muscle building. And so, he's really intense about getting all his protein, and he eats so much meat, a massive amount of meat. He is throwing in, like, he makes his own green smoothies, throws in some spinach in there just because I finally got the doctor to kind of help me
Yes.
out with this. But I do worry that this is not a balanced diet, that he's so hardcore on the protein that he's like lacking other things. But he is very rigid. He is like, this is what I want. He eats no sugar. He's like, this is what I want. And so I almost just allow it. I honor it. It is what it is. I don't think I have a lot of wiggle room, but like, how would you deal with someone who you have a parent that they're worried that they truly aren't getting the right nutrition?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because almost most parents that I work with are truly worried about nutrition. So it gets a little tricky with picky eaters. So when a child, their food range is so limited, right? It's really hard to even fathom that they could eat in a nutritious way day in and day out, because there's just such a limited amount of foods typically that they will eat. So when families come to me and they're really worried about nutrition, typically we have to kind of address the picky eating first. So we have to kind of establish all the things to help lessen rigidity, address the root causes, help them to expand their food range. And
Mm,
initially, that might mean their child is not eating that nutritious, right? And that can be
mhm,
really hard for a lot of parents.
mhm,
But the ultimate goal is typically to go more towards a nutritious lifestyle. So we kind of start with strategies to address picky eating. And then once we have those foundational strategies in place, then we can kind of shift our mindset and really start thinking about how to increase nutrition and improve nutrition, and focusing on a balanced, more healthy diet. And if parents want to go that way, this route, we can talk about how to lessen sugar, or how to eat less processed foods, increase our protein. So yes, it gets tricky with picky eating, but it is absolutely possible to move
Mm.
towards improved nutrition with picky eaters. It's just it's more of a winding up and down path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I did have a client that had that challenge. In fact, I should refer the family to you, but she was very picky about, well, all her meals, but it gave her such limited options that she wasn't really eating breakfast because she would only eat, and I can't remember what it was now, a certain thing, but that required preparation. And her parents were like, you're old enough now. I mean, she's a senior at this point where you should be making your own breakfast, but she couldn't plan her morning well enough. And I was trying to help her. That was part of my job, to coach her to, the right time to wake up so she'd have enough time to make her own breakfast. Inevitably, she didn't want to do it, and there was nothing else for her to eat. And she was so picky. She's like, I refuse all these other things. And so it's just this challenge. And there's this vicious cycle with the parents, and they were stressed out. She was stressed out. Then she was hungry and cranky, and then she's taking it out on them. And it just kind of became this whole mess. So I actually love what you do, because you're really tackling all the parts of it. You're tackling the emotions, you're tackling the behaviors, you're tackling the root cause, you're tackling the nutrition. So I think I'm in awe of what you're doing. And so I'm curious, do you meet with the teenagers as well, or do you just meet with the parents, or how does that work?
Yeah, good question. So I have a coaching program for parents.
Okay.
Where I have an online curriculum so that you can go at your own pace, and then the parent can meet with me to get support. But there's absolutely families that their teenager needs more one-on-one guidance and support. And so, in addition to my coaching program for parents, I absolutely do one-on-one coaching sessions with the parent and the teenager. And
Mm,
it's actually I love one-on-ones because it helps to kind of dive more deep into the specific challenge of their teenager,
yeah.
and really address those specific challenges. And it's great for teenagers because they're old enough, to participate and have a say in what we're doing. And
Right.
so it's great to also talk with the teenager and talk to them about, what they're struggling with and what that feels like. And is there anything that they wish that could be easier for them around meal times? And I try to really listen also to the teenager's goal to kind of help them, to listen to what they want too.
Yeah.
So yes, one-on-ones are a great option. And then I also do guest speaking events for parents of toddlers to teens,
Mm.
um, to help give, again, just parents resources on how they can help their child.
Okay. Okay. I love that, because you're kind of doing the big groups and the one-on-ones, and kind of
Mhm.
helping people wherever they're ready to be. They have to be willing and open to, receiving feedback and receiving coaching and stuff like that. So I think that's great that you offer all those. And so how do you, I imagine, like, I always try to think, like, who would this person be? And I imagine their mindset. I imagine their kind of emotions in my head. And I imagine that this mom that comes to you is just exasperated. I imagine she's exhausted. I imagine she's just like fed up. And so, how do you support that when the mom is like, I've tried all these things and nothing's working? Like, how do you help her?
Absolutely. So yes, moms typically come to me and everything you said, worried, exhausted, frustrated, mad sometimes, just they not understanding what's going on. And so typically how I help these moms is just helping them to understand that they're not alone. Um
Mm,
and they're usually surprised to hear this, honestly, especially in the teenage years. I get a lot
yeah.
of moms that will message me and say, do you even work with teenagers? And
Mm,
absolutely, I do. And it's more common in teenagers than I think people understand. And there's a lot of teenagers that are struggling with this. So helping the mom see that they're not alone is a big piece to it. And then, talking to the mom, letting them know that there are specific strategies that we can do that can truly help things and change things and transform, the mealtime battles and the mealtime stress. So then, giving the mom hope is a huge piece. So acknowledging the stress, and giving them hope that there's a lot of things that we can do to help their child, to help their
mm.
teenager.
I think that's so important, because that's why I do this show. If we're supporting the mom, it's actually supporting the whole family, right? Because, well, I won't get into moms, but moms are the heart, right? Moms are the emotional hub of the family. Like moms are the mothership. We run it all. And I know there's lots of dads out there who are amazing and they do so much, but like, I love moms. Moms are my passion, and teenagers as well. So I would love it if you could share a story about maybe a client. Obviously it's confidential, but like if you could share a story about a client that you were so, excited or happy with the result or the transformation that you took them through.
Yes. Oh, I know exactly who I want to talk about when you say this. So yes, I was working with a teenager, and I guess probably around the age of 13, 14. And she was really struggling with kind of a fear around eating. She kind of had a traumatic event that created a lot of fear around eating. And what resulted of that is she kind of stopped eating. And because of the fear and anxiety, and there's a certain diagnosis called ARFID. It's called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. So that ended up being her diagnosis. So it's really just a form of like extreme picky eating. Okay. But she became so fearful of what if she choked again. That was a traumatic event, is that she had a choking episode. And so stopped eating, had to go to the hospital. A feeding tube was placed to make sure she got the nutrition and hydration that she needed to survive and to be healthy. And she started working with me. I think around the time the feeding tube was placed, and I think we worked together for about a year. So it took time, and there was a lot of small milestones over time, but we worked together weekly. And she made so much progress to eventually that fear of eating lessened and lessened. We had to work through all these different foods to get to the point to where she could maintain herself nutritionally. Her feeding tube was weaned, and now she's doing wonderful. And I absolutely loved working with her. I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of her parents and her mom for the dedication that it took to come, work with me and to go through this, and the stress I can only imagine that would cause on a mom or a parent. But yes, she's doing great, and has worked through that challenge. And yeah, I love what I do. I love getting to help teenagers and parents with these struggles.
I love that story. That's it sounds like from one extreme to now she's like thriving and doing well and is healthy. And I'm curious, do you ever get approached with the eating disorder of anorexia and bulimia, or is that your thing or not?
Good question. So I don't get approached with that a lot. But I could see how it could be confusing, because we talk about feeding disorders, which is more, or picky eating, more kind of what I work with, and then eating disorders. So eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia, that's totally different from a feeding disorder. So eating disorders is more based on body perception.
Right.
And feeding disorders is more based on a limited food range, kind of based on those root causes that I kind of established earlier. There's not a body image relationship when I'm working with picky eaters.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
It totally does. Yeah, I'm so glad that we clarified that, because I wasn't sure how it was intermingled with what you do. Okay, that's great. Awesome. Okay, so I know you have a promotion to offer the listeners. So if you're watching the show and you need Amy's help, you reach out to her, let her know that you heard about her from me. And what would you like to offer the listeners?
Yes, I would love to offer the listeners of this podcast a complimentary one-on-one coaching session with myself. So it could be the parent and myself. It could even be the parent, the teenager, and myself. But yes, I would love to offer that to anyone who reaches out to me that would like to learn more about my services and how I can help. And yes, I'd be happy to offer a free one-on-one so that they can kind of understand more about what I do and if they feel like it would be a good fit to work with me.
Yeah, that's an amazing and generous offer. So thank you. And how can people, the listeners, find you going forward? Website, social media, or where should we send them?
Absolutely. So I have a website. It's littletableofgrace.com.
Okay.
And then on my website, there's a button that you can click to book a complimentary call with me. You can join my newsletter and get hooked up with all of my resources and tips for parents of super picky eaters. And then I, of course, also have different social media channels, and just looking up Little Table of Grace Coaching, you would be able to find me on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok.
That's perfect. Well, thank you. And is there anything else that we didn't cover that I didn't ask you that you think would be important or helpful for the moms to hear today?
I think one thing I want to mention, because when I was giving the example of the client that I worked with, that was more of an extreme side of some picky eating challenges and ARFID. But I work with teenagers and parents along the entire continuum of picky eating. So even if there's just a family that their child's a little hesitant, they wish their child had improved nutrition, ate a more balanced diet, I work with those families to kind of teach them how to navigate that all the way towards, more typical picky eating and then extreme picky eating. So I work with families and teenagers that wherever they're at on their feeding journey that they're struggling with, I'm there to help.
Okay. I'm so glad you clarified that. So there's a big spectrum and yes. Okay.
Huge spectrum.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you sharing all this information. I learned so much just hearing from you. So I thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast, because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.